Let's get this shit started.
This is the Down and Dirty Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast with your host, Nick Anderson.
What is up, Dynasty Degenerates? This is your host, Nick Anderson, with the Down and Dirty Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast, or as y'all know it, the TripleDFFP. And y'all, we are making a trek into uncharted territory today because we are starting out with a new co-host on the show in Etan Mozia, and I could not be more excited, y'all. He has so much information to bring to the table. You probably heard him on the Dynasty Diagnostic podcast, and so, give him a big round of applause, a big welcome. Etan, thank you for coming on to be our co-host, man. What's going on today?
Hey man, what is going on? What's happening, Nick? I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be the other side of the coin today and moving forward. I'm definitely looking forward to where this goes. And man, I mean, you give everyone that listens to the program good news. You tell them about players you like, and you tell them about all the good things about these players and why we should be so excited about guys that are more projection really than reality. So what my purpose is going to be here in this whole co-hosting thing at all is I'm going to be the devil's advocate. I'm going to give you all the negative stuff about all the guys we're hyping up. So at least we have a balanced kind of holistic view of these guys moving forward, man.
I like it. You need to be the yin to my yang. That's what I like to see. So we've got an exciting day tomorrow. We already have football on Thursday, but we got the meat and potatoes of this week coming tomorrow in Week 1 NFL Sunday football, y'all. And I couldn't be more excited about it. But we had some stuff pop off today, Etan. We had two guys that were, teetering on the edge right there. We didn't know how this was going to pan out. We had two guys get signed today. Why don't you tell them about what those contracts look like?
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing. I mean, it was even more than two guys that got signed. It just happened to be two guys that got signed at the same position. Then there was another signing out there that I'm going to talk about. If you've ever seen my profile, if you've ever seen my page on Twitter, I'm going to talk about this guy every opportunity I get. But I'm going to hold that off for a little bit. The two guys that I think you were referring to were both Alvin Kamara and Dalvin Cook. Alvin Kamara obviously was the guy that we didn't necessarily really know what was going on, whether it be the contract, whether it be the epidural shot that he had in his back, whether it be this, that, or the other thing. There were a lot of concerns that kind of came up and just started swirling fairly recently around Alvin Kamara. But the fact that now he's tied to the contract that gives him over $30 million guaranteed, a $75 million contract over 5 years that makes him one of the highest paid running backs if you look at average annual value, just kind of dissipates all those questions, right? I mean, if the Saints were worried about Alvin Kamara's back, if they were worried about the injury, if there was a medical concern there, or if there was a workload type concern there with how they've used Alvin Kamara to date, then we wouldn't see these numbers reported. So the simple fact that they were able to go out there and give Alvin Kamara more guaranteed money than Christian McCaffrey, I think really, really shows you the type of belief that they have in this dude moving forward and the type of plans that they have for him beyond Drew Brees.
I completely agree with that. That's the one thing that the contract's great. It shows his long-term stability in the offense. It solidifies his ranking in the dynasty pantheon of running backs right now. But more than anything, it puts my mind at ease about that epidural. If that epidural was anything of any substance, I don't believe that they would have gotten this 5-year, $75 million contract done. And so seeing the product and the price and everything puts my mind at ease, and I feel comfortable starting Alvin Kamara Week 1 through Week 16,
Absolutely. And that is just one of the two guys at the same position that got signed today. Dalvin Cook also had his big contract come through Roses today. 5 years, $63 million. He's at 12.6 average annual value. That puts him above Joe Mixon, who just signed a contract last week at about $12 million average annual value. And that puts him, again, in the top pantheon of running backs in the NFL in terms of what these guys are going to be making year over year. He didn't get nearly as many guarantees as Alvin Kamara. I think a lot of that probably has to do with just some of the injury issues that Dalvin Cook has had to deal with early in his career. But I mean, if you were a Dalvin Cook, if you were somebody that rostered Dalvin Cook in any way, I mean, this is great news for you. This is all you've ever wanted, because the unique thing about that Minnesota Vikings defense is almost like that Seattle Seahawks defense. It's a defense that is built around the run, and there's very, very few of those in the entire NFL. Even better in the case of Dalvin Cook is the fact that even though you have somebody competent behind him in Alexander Mattison, who I really think they should give more carries, and Mike Boone, but that's neither here nor there, there is not a running back by committee that goes on in with the Vikings. It's Dalvin Cook's job, and it's really no one else's. So whether that be running the ball, whether that be in the passing game, with the detraction of Stephon Diggs from that offense, I think you can really kind of look at Dalvin Cook as probably that team's number 2 wide receiver, so to speak, moving forward, for as long as it takes Justin Jefferson to really get up to speed, and for as long as it takes Irv Smith to really get into that role. But I mean, this is definitely a positive for anybody that's ever had anything to do with Alvin Kamara, because I mean, he's going to be in a situation that is going to feature him for a long time.
Yep. And I mean, again, like I said, I don't think that this doesn't have the same calming effect as Kamara's contract does. It has the same calming effect in the sense that, I know where Cook's going to be for the next arguably 5 years, but it doesn't have the same calming effect about the injury history. Dalvin is still the injury risk that he was 5 days ago, okay? But he's going to be a bell cow running back for the next arguably 5 years in a run-first Minnesota offense that he has excelled at. And so the passing game, the running game, everything is full go, all gas, no brakes for Dalvin Cook. And I'm super excited because not only am I also a Vikings fan, but I'm a huge Dalvin Cook fan to boot with that. So it's great news for me about one of my favorite players in the NFL. So let's move on from the contract situations. You said you're going to talk about that third contract here later on. We'll get into the injuries to look out for coming into week 1 on this. So of note in the wide receiver realm, we've got Mike Evans, who has been upgraded to questionable. Okay, he's been upgraded to questionable, and I am questionable about that designation, Etan. What do you think about that? Because my personal opinion is that if Mike Evans is on the field, that doesn't help out Mike Evans. That helps out Chris Godwin. I'm not starting Evans if he touches the field.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be contrarian with this. I want to come out guns blazing with something completely aside from what you just talked about. But, man, I 100% agree with you. I mean, the fact that he was doubtful at any point during this week is already something to make you really start to consider. And then the fact that he's going to be covered by Marshawn Lattimore, if he is healthy, is probably the other thing that puts you off him entirely. Like you said, if anything, it helps Chris Godwin because it means Chris Godwin's not going to be followed by the number 1 receiver if they decide to play Chris Godwin in the slot, maybe to have Scotty Miller or Justin Watson come in on the outside to be the guy that's going to be opposite Chris Godwin in 2 wide receiver sets. But, yeah, I think Mike Evans is definitely somebody that you want to play every single time you can possibly play him. He is deserved when it comes to what his draft price was on draft day, I think. But, yeah, this has got to be one of those situations where you got to play it safe than sorry and use those other guys that you have. Use maybe some of the guys that we might talk about a little bit later that are getting elevated into a starting role because of some other injuries around the NFL.
Exactly. It sounds like we're on the same page with Evans. So let's move on to the next injury designation. We've got Kenny Golladay listed as questionable, and I think it's actually doubtful. I'm not 100% sure. He's been floating around between doubtful and questionable. I don't think that there's much of a chance from what I've been hearing that Kenny G touches the field. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's doubtful. It's doubtful, and it's been doubtful for a while. It's never even been upgraded like Mike Evans was, so whether or not they're even thinking of playing him at this point, I don't even think it's a question. I don't think he's going to see the field. And kind of like Mike Evans being out or Mike Evans being in there as a decoy would help Chris Godwin, I think Kenny G being out does a lot for some of the other pieces on that team. There's a lot of people that are already going to be heavily investing in Marvin Jones because Marvin Jones is kind of that week one warrior where you expect him to put up big numbers as long as he's getting some targets, because we've just seen that throughout his career. But I think the more interesting play, even, especially when you're looking at a guy like Kenny Golladay, who has a premier red zone target presence, is a guy by the name of TJ Hawkinson. He's 100% healthy now, at least that's what he said so far, and he's probably going to be looked in to be in that role where he's receiving plenty of work, plenty of targets in the 20s, in those money situations close to the goal line that might bump up his value a little bit. But yeah, you can't play Kenny G. He's not going to play anyway, so if you were going to start him, you're probably getting a 0. But yeah, it's a situation to monitor, because I do think that Mike Evans being upgraded at least means that we might see Mike Evans in week 2. I think Kenny Golladay staying at doubtful and being doubtful pretty much all week, at least since the injury was reported, I think that has maybe some cause for worrying about week 2 and beyond.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate to hear that about a player that I was incredibly high on this season. Super excited to be able to see the matchup or the tandem of him and Stafford finally come to fruition, but it's looking like it's going to take us a couple weeks to be able to get there. Another lesser significant injury on the team is Danny Amendola, who's listed as questionable as well. I think that we'll get a little bit more into the analysis of the teams once we get to the breakdowns, but I think that could open up some lanes for a guy that I'm super excited about if he can actually get some targets in Quintez Cephas. But we'll move on from Danny Amendola. Courtland Sutton, a recent injury in practice to his shoulder, has him out, and he will be out for the foreseeable future. So that's one injury that we've got right there. Not touching the field for weeks. Mike Williams out of the Los Angeles Chargers is questionable with a shoulder injury. I do not believe that he's going to be playing. Deebo Samuel today got bumped down to out and put on the IR with his foot injury. So that's something that you need to be paying attention to.
3 weeks at minimum.
Yep, that's terrible, man. It's such bad news, because I think that he probably had to have a re-aggravation of that injury, because it seemed like he was on pace to come back to the field, and then they bump him down to out and put him on the IR designation. Did you hear anything about him re-aggravating it?
I don't know if I heard anything about him re-aggravating it, and I don't necessarily know if re-aggravation was the issue here. I think he was just kind of super optimistic, but what we were told when the injury actually happened was that this was going to be a 6 to 8 week injury, and this happened about a month ago. So this is kind of still on track with what we were thinking that this injury was going to be. Only the most optimistic of people who maybe just looked at his situation over the last week or so even had any inclination to go ahead and play a guy like Deebo Samuel this week. But yeah, I do think it was going to be Brandon Ayuk. It was going to be Kendrick Bourne on the outside, and they were just going to run. They were going to use Raheem Mostert. They were going to use Tevin Coleman. They were going to use Jerick McKinnon, probably even a little bit more in the passing game. And obviously George Kittle is the guy to own, the guy that's going to absolutely go off. So I really do think that it's going to be some time until we get Deebo Samuel kind of reintegrated into that offense, and that really presents an opportunity for those guys that went in really heavy into getting Brandon Ayuk and rookie drafts to see if that pays off early, and see if there's maybe even an opportunity to go ahead and use that to upgrade maybe a roster position somewhere else in about 3 to 4 weeks when Deebo comes back.
Right. And that's somebody that I've been coming around on here lately is the prospect of Brandon Ayuk, and we'll get the opportunity to see him this week and see if he pans out. Golden Tate is questionable with a hamstring injury. Corey Davis is questionable with a hamstring injury. I haven't heard anything about either of those possibly not playing right now, so I'd expect them to touch the field. But if you have alternative options that don't have bum hammies right now, I would probably be looking their direction. And a last one on the injury list for wide receivers is Amari Cooper came up questionable, but it did not provide his actual injury listing. Do you have any idea what that was about?
I actually didn't even see this. I have heard some things about Amari Cooper over the past couple of days, but I did not know that it was an injury designation that came up for Cooper. But, I mean, that definitely throws a wrench in the works with what we would expect from this Dallas Cowboys team, at least initially, because before that, all things were pretty much lined up for the Dallas Cowboys this year to be like the Los Angeles Rams of 2 seasons ago and have 3 wide receivers with over 1,000 yards that are probably within a shout of being top 15 wide receiver assets during the course of the season. Now, if Amari Cooper is hurt, we don't necessarily know if he's going to play into that as quickly as we thought. That said, Amari Cooper is a dude that plays through injuries. He played through injury all of last year. He had a Lisfranc injury, I think, in his foot for the majority of last season and played right through it. And we've seen him play through injury in Oakland as well. So a lot of these people that are a little bit frustrated with Amari Cooper, that see that he has these spike weeks and then he drops off a little bit, and then he has these spike weeks and then he drops off a little bit, I think need to also understand that this is a guy that's often playing hurt. This is a guy that's often doing more than most of us should really be expecting from an athlete that has the distinction and really not the benefit of health most of the time. So I do think that this Dallas Cowboys offense is going to be fine regardless of who plays. Michael Gallup himself can be a wide receiver 1. We don't know what CeeDee Lamb is yet, but we know what CeeDee Lamb is. I mean, CeeDee Lamb is a beast in and of himself. Blake Jarwin's obviously there as well. If anything, he probably sees a target bump if Amari doesn't go. But I really do think that this is going to be a shorter-term thing for Cooper just because we've seen him come out and perform kind of like Julio, banged up or not.
And so just for clarification on this, I'm just pointing it out strictly to keep an eye on, because on the NFL injury report, it does not list an injury, and it says that Cooper was a full participant in practice, but lists his status as questionable. So I have no idea if it's a personal thing, what's going on with it, but it's something to keep an eye on moving forward if you are planning on having Amari in your starting lineup. So that concludes the wide receiver section of the injury report. We'll go down to the significantly shorter running back portion. As far as I can tell, there are no tight ends and no quarterbacks that have an injury designation at this point. It seems like it's all systems go for those positions. But down at the running back, we've got Deandre Swift, who surprisingly does not have an injury designation. So that's something that I'm very excited about. You know, he is going to be in that 3-headed committee back out there with Adrian Peterson, Kerryon Johnson, and himself. But as of right now, they are not listing him as an injury designation. So keep in the back of your head that he did have a hammy problem, but he seems healthy right now. And Miles Sanders is a last-minute out, you guys. He is not going to be flying with the team. He is not going to be playing in the game. That hamstring injury must be more lingering than we anticipated. So obviously get Boston Scott off your bench and start getting him ready for the lineup. But this is another thing where we talked about lingering injuries. Miles Sanders is one that I would be tentatively acquiring in fantasy leagues and redraft and in dynasty. But it worries me that this might be a multiple week injury if he's already out right now, you know, with this hamstring injury. What do you think about that, Etan?
Yeah, and I think I would have to agree with you. It's not even the fact that he's missing a game because, I mean, obviously, if you get banged up, you're going to miss the game. But not traveling with the team is the thing that really kind of puts the blaring, okay, this might be bad type of light in the back of my head when it comes to looking at a Miles Sanders. This is something, though, that they've been dealing with all offseason. They didn't really go to the well to get somebody in there to replace him. So that tells me one of two things. Either they're very confident in both Boston Scott and Corey Clement behind Miles Sanders, or maybe they were a little bit over-optimistic in thinking that Miles Sanders was going to be able to play earlier than I guess is happening now. But, I don't expect him to be out for too long, again, because kind of like Deebo Samuel, we got this information weeks ago, and it's getting to the tail end of whatever recovery process was reported at the time. So I do think that you'll be able to get some production from him soon. But, I mean, Boston Scott has to be elevated into that RB 1.5, RB 2 range. I really do think that he's a solid play this week. I don't think that Corey Clement is going to take too much away from him. And I do think that Philadelphia offense, even though the offensive line is banged up, is just going to be one of those offenses that you want the running back in because you expect that guy to get a decent amount of targets because of their issues at wide receiver, starting a potentially still banged up Jalen Reagor at that spot.
Right. Exactly. And I completely agree with you on all points on that. And then the final injury designation is David Montgomery was a full participant in practice, still listed as questionable with the preseason groin injury that we saw him suffer. I fully believe that he's going to be out there on the field playing, but remember that he is still recovering from this injury and was not expected back by week 1. So this is ahead of schedule for this injury that he suffered. So be cautious when placing him into your lineup. I think that Tariq Cohen is going to have a pretty substantial share of the touches this week over David Montgomery because they're going to be putting him on a pitch count. So just keep that in the back of your mind when you're looking at your starting lineup.
And the issue with David Montgomery is the fact that, David Montgomery is a guy that doesn't really have incredible bursts anyway. He focuses a lot on his agility and his ability to jump cut away from contact at the very last moment to kind of keep himself having that full head of steam. This is a groin injury. This is going to make it very, very difficult to go ahead and do what he does best. So I do think that regardless of whether or not he plays, I think he was an iffy play to begin with because of who he is and the offense he finds himself in. But adding this particular injury to kind of what David Montgomery does on the football field, that starts to really scare me when it comes to looking at what this could potentially mean for him this season.
Exactly. 100% on that. So now that sums up. Are there any other injuries that you wanted to talk about? I think I went down the list of the NFL injury report, but was there anybody that I missed from you?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, let's get into the week 1 matchups, guys. So we're just going to be basically doing a rundown of the week 1 matchups, talking about our favorite starts, our must starts, and the guys that we do not want to see on our starting lineup that need to be riding the bench this week. So without further ado, let's jump into the first game of the week in the Raiders versus the Panthers, okay? So it's going to be at Carolina. Who are you really excited to see the Raiders play or see from the Raiders this week?
Both the Raiders and the Panthers are probably going to boast 2 of the weakest defenses in the entire NFL this year. And on top of boasting some of the weakest defenses in the entire NFL, they actually have pretty poor run defenses as well, as we've seen over the past couple of seasons. So I think Josh Jacobs, CMC, obviously you're playing these guys, but I think this is a smash spot to play these guys because they happen to be playing each other. I also just I anticipate a bunch of points scored here because of the defenses we're seeing and because of the talent that both of these teams have on offense. We talked about injuries earlier. The injury to Tyrell Williams means we're seeing a rookie starting in Bryan Edwards on the Raiders. Obviously, people have high hopes for DJ Moore. Curtis Samuel is still a thing that we expect to happen at some point. Darren Waller, you think, is going to be productive in this game as well because of the absence of Luke Kuechly and not having that guy on that defense anymore that's really going to go ahead and shut down tight ends. So I really do think that this can kind of be a blast-off game, first and foremost for those running backs, but really for everybody on those rosters because nobody's going to be stopping anybody, especially not in a year we have no preseason, especially not with these teams and what their situation is at D-back.
Right. And so for reference, on the PFF grade for defensive lines, the Raiders come in at the 28th worst the 28th best defensive line in the league, and the Panthers come in at the 29th. And for secondaries in the NFL, the Raiders come in at the 24th ranked secondary, and the Panthers at the 31st. So we are dealing with some dumpster fire defenses this week, which makes for all-star fantasy performances. Obviously, where all systems go for CMC and Josh Jacobs, the receiving core of the Raiders is going to be the most interesting portion for me. I want to see who comes out on top. I want to see if it's Henry Ruggs. I want to see if it's Bryan Edwards. We know Darren Waller's going to get his, even though I think he's a little bit of an aberration from last season. But, I want to see who's going to come out on top with that. DJ Moore is obviously going to be the bell cow, but is it going to be Robbie Anderson or is it going to be Curtis Samuel who sees the second reps in that offense? I'm personally most excited to see Curtis Samuel's production this week and Bryan Edwards' production this week because I feel like this could be the catalyst for a great season that we've been waiting for from Curtis Samuel and anticipating from Bryan Edwards.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I want to see good things from Curtis Samuel. I don't know if it's going to happen because Robbie Anderson signing kind of deflated what I thought Curtis Samuel was going to be this year. And this is nothing against Curtis Samuel even. As a wide receiver, he's a guy that has more versatility than people give him credit for. The guy can be a slot receiver as much as he can be that outside deep receiver that he was playing last year. The simple issue with me is, I mean, it's still Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback. I mean, say what you want to say about this guy. You can throw every statistic in the world at me about pace of play and how this team goes fast and how this is perfectly lined up for him because he's going to have guys that are pretty much closer to him. He's going to be able to maintain his career ADOT that's not very far and still be able to have guys that are going to give him yak and all that. But at the same time, we've seen this guy in the NFL. You know, we've seen what Teddy Bridgewater can be in the NFL, and that's usually 281 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I'm not necessarily expecting fireworks from him this season, but I do think he's going to be a valuable start, a valuable streamer pretty much throughout the season. And this is going to be one of those matchups where I think he's going to have to score points because I'm expecting a little bit more than we saw last season from this Raiders offense.
Right. And so when looking at this matchup, I don't think there's necessarily a must-sit in this matchup. So, you know, all systems go for how we respectively view each of these players. You know, I mean, it's a flex option possibly for Bryan Edwards and some of those other auxiliary guys, but your studs, start your studs this week. So let's move on to the next matchup where we've got the Eagles versus the Washington football team at Washington. Who are you most excited about in this matchup?
Man, I am most excited about Terry McLaurin. I know the dynasty community, the fantasy community, is probably most excited about Jalen Reagor. And I get it, but obviously I'm going to go with a guy who's shown that he can already do it. I mean, I think a lot has been said about Dwayne Haskins that isn't true. I think Dwayne Haskins was learning on the fly in one of the worst offenses in the league last season. If you look at those last 4 games or so of Dwayne Haskins' season last year, it was actually a lot better than people really give him credit for. So I think he's going to have the tools to go ahead and actually provide this team with a little bit of a spark on offense that they haven't had recently. I would also say that, I mean, this Washington football team defense is terrifying. If you're playing quarterback, if you're Carson Wentz going up against this defensive line, this is just like practice because the Philadelphia Eagles have been kind of the team with the defensive line that scares people for the last few seasons. And now if you look at the Washington football team defensive line, you see all first-round picks. And then Chase Young on top of that, who's another first-round pick. So
PFF ranked number 3 defensive line in the league.
Absolutely.
And Chase Young has looked like an absolute fucking monster in training camp. Good Lord, he is a man among boys.
Absolutely. So it's going to be a matter of whether or not Carson Wentz can get the ball out early. That said, when you look at the back of these defenses, I think that's where it becomes a little bit more suspect. Obviously, Darius Slay going to the Philadelphia Eagles is going to be tremendous, and if anything, that might take a little bit away from Terry McLaurin in this particular matchup. But I don't think that these two teams are really teams, or this entire division, if you put the Cowboys in that as well, I don't think that these teams are teams that are really built to stop anyone. I think they're teams that are built to score on you, aside from Washington. So if we're going to see maybe a game where we see the Eagles get out to a lead, then maybe there's a chance for a blow-up week for everybody. But if this is kind of what I expect it to be and is pretty much a slog where maybe the Eagles win it by a touchdown, win it maybe 10 points, then I think this might be a little bit more muted for fantasy on both sides of the football.
Right. And so when talking about their secondaries, when we look at the PFF grades on them, the Eagles have the 12th ranked secondary, and the Washington football team, I keep wanting to call them the Redskins, taboo, they are the 28th ranked football team by PFF secondary grade on that. And you were talking about Terry McLaurin, and I am a huge Terry McLaurin fan. I am a huge Dwayne Haskins fan because, like you, I think that he has more in the tank than we have seen from him at all at this point. But I am pretty worried about Darius Slay shadowing Terry McLaurin this entire game because they don't have any other receiving weapons out there. So I still think that he's a must start if you drafted him to be a starter, but I'm fading him from his ceiling that we would usually see on a week-to-week basis. The person that I'm most excited to see in this matchup, and don't get me wrong, I'm not one of these crazy fanboys, but I am excited to see Antonio Gibson and Bryce Love to see what their workloads are like respectively in this game. Obviously, we think Gibson is going to come out on top, but how do you think Bryce Love's going to fare?
A lot of people have a lot to say about this Washington RB room, and obviously it's a lot clearer without Darius Geis there, without Adrian Peterson there. So, I mean, there's definitely something to be said. But I really do think that Antonio Gibson might have kind of jumped the shark in terms of what his value is versus what is the level of production that we expect from this guy. There's a lot that's still unknown. Obviously, everyone and their mother has already heard, well, he's only had 33 carries in college. He was used primarily as a wide receiver in college. Now he's going to be switching to running back. They're excited about him. They think that there's some CMC in him, but at the same regard, there's a lot to get there. There's a lot you have to do as an NFL player to get there. If you even look at CMC, his first year, he wasn't really that dude who we expected to get the workload that he's getting now. And that's the thing that makes CMC so valuable, the fact that he can be used in all phases and he's always on the field. With J.D. McKissic, with the other backs they have in that backfield, I really do think this is going to be more split than we would hope as fantasy managers, and that we're going to get a lot of these guys produce, but this guy's production is going to negatively impact this guy's production, who's going to negatively impact that guy's production, and so on and so forth. So I really do think that they're going to cannibalize a lot of each other's looks, a lot of each other's carries, a lot of each other's targets, and we don't know who's going to get the money targets on that team yet. We don't know who's going to get the money touches on that team yet when it comes to guys at the goal line. When it comes to those touches in the 20, we would expect Antonio Gibson to get the targets as well, but that's what J.D. McKissick's specialty is. So this can really go a lot of ways, and I think people are going to be disappointed if you're expecting a lot from Antonio Gibson, at least initially in the first few weeks of the season until everything starts to sort itself out talent-wise.
Yep. And I completely agree. The first 2 weeks are going to be telling for a lot of the role plays for these rookie running backs. And we'll get more into that as we come up on them, like J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor, all of those guys. But because this is a dynasty channel and it is not simply just who to start this week, if you have Antonio Gibson and people are offering you insane offers for him, do not take him off the table. Consider everything that is sent to you, because I could 100% see a realm right now where somebody would take, Antonio Gibson in a second for J.K. Dobbins, and if you could get that trade done, you take that trade all day and twice on Sunday. So make sure that you're always capitalizing on the hype, because he could be as high in value as he's ever going to be today. Looking at the other side of the ball, though, on the Eagles offense, I am a little bit excited to see what Jalen Reagor is going to produce. I would not be having him in my starting lineup, especially with his injury concerns, unless it was absolutely necessary. And then, Boston Scott's going to ball out. I have no questions about what he's going to do from the backfield, and we've got Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz out there at tight end, and they're going to do Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz kind of things. So I think that, the Eagles offense is the one that you're looking at the most starters from, but there's some stuff in Terry McLaurin and Antonio Gibson that could make their way into your roster as well. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would 100% agree with that. I really do think that people just need to understand that it might be a little bit tougher for most rookies not named Clyde Edwards-Helaire over the next couple of weeks. So temper your expectations. Be excited, but know what you're working with as well. Know what you're dealing with as well. And like you were saying about those Antonio Gibson trades, I mean, a lot of people are going to see one way or another. This might have been a huge sell opportunity that everybody missed. This also might be a situation where he takes over and he's the running back on that team moving forward. But, I mean, even if you look at draft capital, I think he was drafted in the third round, right?
Yep.
Even if you look at draft capital, there's a lot that can change in a year's time. I mean, people assume that once these guys get these jobs, these guys are going to have these jobs forever. If it turns out that Antonio Gibson is actually a really, really good football player, but he's not really a guy who can get it done at the goal line, he's not really a guy that can get it done short yardage, then there might be a situation where we find that this time next year, Washington is going to be selecting another running back, and that really puts a damper on your Antonio Gibson shares, kind of just the same way that DeAndre Swift put a damper on what Kerryon Johnson was able to do. So pray for health, pray for positivity, but, I mean, also understand that the reason that you can find such outsized returns in the unknown and in being risky is also the way that you can lose a lot of value by not really acting at the right time because of excitement, because of these rookies.
Exactly, 100%. And like we talked about with the contract extensions and signings earlier on in this episode, the places where rookie running backs are going to end up or becoming fewer and far between by the day. And so these offenses, like a Washington football team that doesn't have a bell cow running back, could be a landing spot for a Travis Etienne or a Chuba Hubbard or somebody like that next year, just by default, because, the Vikings aren't going to draft another running back after paying Dalvin Cook a 5-year, $63 million contract. So always keep that in the back of your mind. Let's move on to the next matchup that we've got, and we're going to go over the Seattle Seahawks versus the Atlanta Falcons, and this one is at ATL. So who are you super excited to see in this high-flying affair with a bunch of savory fantasy options to taste?
I mean, the Seattle Seahawks are just tantalizing because Russell Wilson is tantalizing in and of himself. He's just a quarterback that you expect so much from because it seems like his team is actively working against him when it comes to actually trying to win games. Russell Wilson's going out there balling out. Russell Wilson's going out there saving them.
Unlimited.
Exactly. He's been Mr. Unlimited for the longest time. I think his bank account's pretty unlimited as well, too, if you look at what he is making compared to some of these other quarterbacks. But the thing that just makes you smile when you look at this team from a fantasy perspective is the target tree is so narrow. It's so narrow. And they tried so hard to get other guys to be part of that system. Josh Gordon, I think, is reinstated. I think we might see some from him in week 1. But they just said that Philip Dorsett, that wide receiver 3 that they expected to be on this team, had an injury that they didn't anticipate him still dealing with at this moment in time. So that further shrinks this entire team's target profile. And so when you're looking at, even if Russell Wilson only gets 25, 30 pass attempts, they're going to go to one of two guys. And those two guys are Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. I still think that you should be very, very bullish on both of those. In Dynasty, personally, I'm probably trying to get out of the Tyler Lockett sweepstakes just because I do think that part of the reason that you liked Tyler Lockett was the fact that even though you weren't necessarily going to see a huge amount of targets, that he was the guy in that offense. I think adding DK Metcalf to that equation, adding a guy who has a number of years of experience away from Tyler Lockett, a number of years of age and wear and tear away from Tyler Lockett, I think kind of makes him a little bit less valuable of an asset as a whole. But I mean, for this year moving forward, probably for the next couple of seasons, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf on this team, any points that are scored through the air are going to go to those two guys. So I'm really, really excited for them. Whether or not we see Chris Carson get a full workload off of his injury that people seem to just completely have magically forgotten about, I think is definitely going to be something to see. Carlos Hyde, I think, is going to see more workload than people expect. And if Rashad Penny ever comes back, I think we're going to see a few carries for him as well. So it might be a little bit more of a split workload than we've seen in that backfield recently. So, I mean, it's all Seattle Seahawks for me. I'm just really focusing on that team when I'm looking for the value here. What about you on the other side of the coin?
So just before we move on from the Seattle Seahawks, the last player that I want to, dynasty owners especially, to be able to focus on is DJ Dallas. He had an absolutely excellent training camp this offseason. And so when we're talking about a limited, number of targets or a limited tree of targets that can go around, he might find himself as a welcome addition to that passing attack for dump-offs for Russ, especially with a lack of tight end awareness out there. We might find ourselves seeing DJ Dallas get a couple passes out of the backfield. And if he can start to make a name for himself in that arena, he could become a valuable asset in that offense.
I do have a question for you and for the others out there that do like DJ Dallas on that team. I like him too. Yeah, I do. I like DJ Dallas, the player. But I've seen CJ Prosise. I've seen JD McKissick. I've seen a bunch of pass-catching RBs go to Seattle to die. So I'm not necessarily sure if I can get behind DJ Dallas without seeing it first. Do you have any concerns about that?
Oh, I mean, actually, I'm going to be straight up with you. I'd never actually put that together, thinking about the slow, painful death that we've seen their pass-catching running backs go through out there. But I watched DJ Dallas's film. I was really, really excited about him coming out, and he went to an offense that has a lack of pass-catching ability out of that backfield. I mean, we've seen Chris Carson suffer from drops. I know that Carlos Hyde has had some good years with pass catching, but I think that was all fabricated and it was forced targets. So I'm not even worried about that. I mean, if Rashad Penny comes back, I think that he could be an asset there. But right now, DJ Dallas has the show if they decide to start throwing the ball to the running back. It's just a matter of if. Yep. So let's move on to the Atlanta side of the ball in this matchup. So I'm going to say this right now. If you drafted Todd Gurley, I said this about Will Fuller in week 1 as well. If you drafted Todd Gurley and you're not starting him week 1, you should have never drafted Todd Gurley. This is the first time this is the last time that we're going to 100% without a doubt know that he is healthy. So he should be all systems go in your lineup in what I think is going to be a good matchup for him. Then we look at the receivers in this thing, and I'm really excited about Julio. I want to know your take on Calvin Ridley, though. What do you think Calvin Ridley's outlook is in this game and moving forward in this offense? Are you a Calvin Ridley future wide receiver number 1 guy, or are you a little bit more of a pragmatist saying that he's going to be, a wide receiver 3-2 like he's been so far?
People often try to equate Calvin Ridley to Chris Godwin. They say they're two sides of the same coin, that they're basically the same thing, that they're in this wide receiver 2 role, but they're definitely ready to explode and take over that wide receiver 1 role. And you can argue it. I'm not going to agree with you, but you can argue that Chris Godwin did that last year. But I mean, all the teams that the Bucs played against put their number 1 corner on Mike Evans for a reason. Make of that what you will. But I think the same thing can be said of Calvin Ridley. And I think this is kind of the issue that people have with him. I think Calvin Ridley is a great number 2 wide receiver. But Julio Jones just got a contract extension. There's no pathway for Calvin Ridley on the Atlanta Falcons morphing into that number 1 wide receiver for as long as Julio Jones draws breath. As long as that man is breathing, he's going to get 170 targets that year. And that just doesn't leave a huge part of the pie, regardless of what you feel about Mohamed Sanu, regardless of what you feel about what this team is going to do this year. And I think you would also have to understand that the Atlanta Falcons over the last couple of seasons have had some of the worst defensive play that we've seen in this entire NFL. They've had guys get injured pretty much left and right. The one thing that they happen to have this year, for the first time in a long time, is a healthy offensive line. You just talked about Todd Gurley, so I think we're going to see a lot more of a run-focused offense out of the Atlanta Falcons this year, and that you're still going to get wide receiver 1 numbers from Julio and solid wide receiver 2 numbers from Calvin Ridley. But if you expect Calvin Ridley to go ahead and morph into a wide receiver 1 and them to have 2 wide receiver 1s on the same team along with Hayden Hurst and what they expect from him, I do think that that's a bridge too far. I would say a moment ago, if we looked at this matchup before the Jamal Adams trade, I would absolutely say that, okay, well, let's just go buck wild. This team's going to go crazy. But Jamal Adams is also one of the best defenders in the league. Now, I know he's a safety. I know people call him box safety incorrectly because he's more than that, but people do. But I think the simple fact that he's still going to be on that defense opposite them might make this a little bit more tempered from the Atlanta perspective. And again, because of that, I expect just more and more and more for Todd Gurley until the wheels fall off, which might happen in week 2.
And so for reference, the Seattle Seahawks have the 32nd ranked defensive line, according to PFF. So all systems go for Todd Gurley. A guy that you talked about a little bit just a second ago in Hayden Hurst is somebody who I'm really excited about in this matchup. You talked about the addition of Jamal Adams and somebody who's going to be taking the top off of this passing attack, possibly capping Julio and Calvin Ridley's efficiency, but Hayden Hurst can be eating things up in the short intermediate routes. And I think that I am a firm believer. I've written articles on it for the nerds. I am a firm believer that Hayden Hurst can step into the Austin Hooper role that he had last season. I am not of the philosophy that Austin Hooper was an exceptional tight end. I think he was a good tight end, but I think that Hayden Hurst has the ability to be able to replicate numbers to an extent that he put up last season. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I do think it's a role. So I agree with you on that regard. I do think that Hayden Hurst is definitely stepping into a very, very active role in that offense, kind of for the same reason that we were talking about Lockett and DK Metcalf and how that's just a limited target tree. It's the same thing kind of when you look at Atlanta, so I can see where people are coming from, projecting extra targets, this, that, and the other guy. I just don't necessarily know if Hayden Hurst is even as good as an Austin Hooper. I do think that Austin Hooper and Hunter Henry are kind of similarly athletic profile tight ends that are amongst kind of that upper echelon of tight end in the league. Hayden Hurst is pretty damn athletic himself, but I mean, Hayden Hurst just doesn't necessarily, I think, have that same sort of route running ability, that same sort of just feel for zones and really being able to be a volume target in the way that an Austin Hooper would be. So I do expect a starting tight end season from Hayden Hurst. I just don't know if this is going to be the week we see it because he's going to have Jamal Adams on him.
Week 1 will tell all. So let's move on to the next matchup. We're going to get a little bit quicker through these. We're going to be here until midnight. Let's go on to the Jets versus the Bills in Buffalo. So with that matchup, I mean, we've got, an injured Denzel Mims with the Jets, and we've got, an Adam Gase saying that he's going to mitigate Le'Veon Bell's workload. So it's Jamison Crowder and Chris Herndon the only show in town?
Yeah, it's Jamison Crowder, Chris Herndon, Sam Darnold against the world. And I mean the world, literally, when I say that, because this Buffalo defense has the number 2 ranked defense by DVOA, by defensive DVOA in the entire league last season. And they've really made no major changes to that defense. In fact, on that team, the only thing they've done is go ahead and get Zach Moss and get Stephon Diggs and try to pump up that offense just a little bit, knowing how dominant that defense has been. So you have a dominant defense against an offense that we already have question marks about healthy, that now isn't even healthy. So, I mean, we talked a lot about what Chris Herndon could have been last year. We talked a lot about projecting him for just being that breakout tight end last year. It didn't necessarily happen. It could happen this year, but if it's going to happen, I think it's going to happen on volume. I don't think it's going to happen on inefficiency, and it's not going to happen on the Buffalo Bills. So if you're looking for anything out of that New York Jets offense, I think you're probably selecting Jamison Crowder, getting, 6 receptions, 42 yards, maybe a touchdown. Good for you with selecting Jamison Crowder for those numbers. I think Rashad Perriman's going to start in this game, but he's going to be completely erased by White. So do not have any exposure to Jets this particular week because it's just not going to end well for you. This Buffalo Bills defense is one of the best defenses in the league, probably only second to this Pittsburgh defense.
Right. And so just a point for dynasty trades looking at this, I am still a Darnold believer, guys. He is only 23 years old. He is still learning the ropes. He is younger than Joe Burrow. Let that shit sink in that Sam Darnold is younger than Joe Burrow, okay? But think about this. If he's going to have this abysmal of a week 1 against the Bills, you can get him for dirt cheap, even in 2 QB leagues, by an owner who is just fed up with dealing with this stuff. So be on the lookout for trades for Sam Darnold in 2 QB leagues because you might be able to acquire him for dirt cheap. So
and this is why. If you watched the Thursday night game, the announcers could not stop talking about Kelechi Osemele, former Jet. Again, a former Jet who happens to be playing well. Devontae Parker had his best year of his entire career last year. Former Jet. He's suddenly playing well. Kenyon Drake got traded to the Arizona Cardinals last year. He's now in that second round of redraft leagues right now. Former Jet under Adam Gase. Or at least not former Jet, but under Adam Gase. The point is, all of these guys played for Adam Gase. The moment that they were separated,
Ryan Tannehill had a banner career season.
Exactly.
After Adam Gase.
All of these guys played for Adam Gase. The moment they got separated from Adam Gase, it turns out these are actually really, really good NFL players. So keep hope alive for Sam Darnold. Just light a candle for him this year and just kind of hold that by yourself in a dark room. Maybe say some incantations every now and then to just pray for health and pray for not mono if nothing else. But it's going to be a rough year for Sam Darnold, but I do not think that this is the end of Sam Darnold. What I would say is I hope I really hope that he can go out and win 6 games this year and prevent the Jets from being in a situation to select his replacement. Because if they are in the situation to select his replacement, I'm taking Trevor Lawrence over Sam Darnold. And then we have a situation where we don't really know where he ends up. So there is a way it could go bad, but I don't think it's his fault. And I do think that there's still something to be taken from that.
Oh, yeah. So let's move over to the other side of the ball with the Buffalo Bills. They have a stacked offense, but a committee backfield coming into this week. We've got the duo of Zach Moss and Devin Singletary, players that provide a lot of the same assets that the other one does. I personally think that week 1 could be a blow-up week for Zach Moss because I think that the Bills are going to get out to an early and often lead, and they're going to have to rely on the run game. I think that Singletary is going to get his, but Moss is going to get in on that split, and I think that they could both be successful in this outing. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, and that's the saddest thing when looking at this Jets team. Whenever Adam Gase sees something positive, when he sees something beautiful, he has to just completely crap on it. He has to bring it down in some way, and that's what he did with his Jets defense. They were 12th in defensive DVOA last season, but now they don't have C.J. Mosley, who opted out due to the COVID concerns. They don't have Jamal Adams, so I just think that this defense is going to be easy pickings for pretty much every offense out there. If you have Stephon Diggs, again, kind of like Will Fuller, kind of like Todd Gurley, if you have Stephon Diggs, if you drafted Stephon Diggs, and you're not playing Stephon Diggs in week 1 against this Jets team, I don't know what you're doing with your life. So just play as many people as you can against this Jets team. They're a cluster on both sides of the ball. I think you're going to be happy regardless. What you were talking about with Zach Moss and Devin Singletary and how that works out, yeah, I definitely do think that this is the game that maybe one of them is going to go off, maybe both of them is going to go off, but there's going to be a lot of opportunities to run the ball in this game because the Bills aren't going to be scared of the Jets putting up any points on them.
Right. So all systems go for all Bills players. Let's move on to our next matchup. We've got the Colts versus the Jaguars in Jacksonville. With the Colts, I'm really excited to see what MPJ can put out there this year, and I'm also excited to see the resurgence of T.Y. Hilton under a Phillip Rivers run offense. So what are you most excited about on this Colts offense?
This Colts offense, a lot of people are excited about this passing game. I'm a Bronco fan. I've been watching Phillip Rivers for a very, very long time. I'm no longer afraid of watching Phillip Rivers, and I think that has to tell you everything that you need to know about Phillip Rivers. Now, if you're a running back, Phillip Rivers is what you want in your life. Phillip Rivers is what you see when you close your eyes and you just hope for the best thing you could possibly imagine as a pass-catching running back. Phillip Rivers is what you want, but if you're a wide receiver, especially a wide receiver like T.Y. Hilton that is probably more active down the field, even though he does get flexed into the slot often and he does have some of those yak-type receptions that are kind of built into that game plan as a whole, I just don't think that Phillip Rivers is a quarterback that's going to really even get the opportunity to be a volume guy this year. I think everything that you've seen from this team, from the trading of that first-round draft pick for DeForest Buckner at DT, solidifying that defense, from spending that second pick on another running back in Jonathan Taylor, from already having Mack on that offense, from that offensive line being one of the best offensive lines in the league. I'm actually trying to pull up their adjusted line yards, but I'm too stupid to do that, so just kind of take my word for it when I say this is one of the best offensive lines in the league. This Indianapolis Colts, for me, is going to be one of the most run-heavy teams in the league, pretty much game in, game out. And I think they're good enough to do that, and they're good enough to win games 13-10. So I think that's what they're going to try to do in most circumstances. That said, this Jacksonville Jaguars team is an absolute dumpster fire. So if there's going to be a week that this team is going to get the opportunity to go ahead and open it up and kind of show maybe a little bit of what Michael Pittman is, maybe get T.Y. Hilton on the board for a couple of scores, this is probably going to be the game to do it. I just would not expect that week to week from a team that, to me, looks like it's built to run.
100%. And so when we were talking about the rushing attack with the two-headed monster of Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack in this matchup, I am excited about Jonathan Taylor. I think that he is the number one running back out of this rookie class. I think he's going to be an elite option in the NFL, but I am fading him week 1 right now. Marlon Mack is not a slouch, and Jonathan Taylor has not taken the reins fully over in this offense just yet. And I think that we need to temper expectations. If you have to start JT, start him up. But I'm saying don't expect week 6 numbers out of Jonathan Taylor in week 1 because we don't know what the split is going to be yet. And Jonathan Taylor hasn't gotten the time to show on-field production to be able to trounce Marlon Mack yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think that a lot of people are kind of taking that for granted. But I mean, even kind of looking at just what the Indianapolis Colts do as a whole, they're one of the slowest teams when looking at their situation neutral pace last season. I think they were something like 6th, 7th from bottom in terms of situational neutral pace, meaning that this team is not trying to go ahead and run play after play after play after play on you. They try to bleed the clock. They're built to run, and they're going to continue to do that. So even if it turns out that Marlon Mack does really get the majority of carries, I think there's going to be plenty for JT in this game, and there's going to be an opportunity for him in this game as well. On the other side of the coin, obviously, DJ Chark is going to be huge in this game, kind of regardless of what he's playing. I know he's playing one of the better defenses in the league, but this is a team I expect to be down in pretty much every game and to be down early. And if that's going to be the case, then I think they're going to have to do whatever they can to get back in games, and that's just going to mean a lot of points for Laviska Shenault, a lot of points for DJ Chark, and a lot of points for Gardner Minshew as he, like Sam Darnold, tries to do his best to keep that team viable enough to not have his replacement drafted over him next offseason.
Right. And, I mean, I am as excited as anybody can be about Laviska Shenault in this offense. Obviously, I got mad love for DJ Chark, but Laviska has that hybrid ability in this offense that has seen Leonard Fournette depart, and now they have a semi-gaping hole in their rushing attack. And you have a wide receiver that can not only catch the ball, but can be an Deebo Samuel-style hybrid back that can do sweeps and rushes out of the backfield. So I think that Laviska Shenault could be a sleepy, actual fantasy-relevant player in 2020, where I can't say that about a ton of these rookie wide receivers.
I would have to agree with that just because, again, it's a smaller target tree. This is a team that you expect to be down in every game, and they're going to have to get back in games. The only way to do that is to pass the football.
Yep. And then we got Robinson out of the backfield. I am lukewarm on his prospects right now, but I do think that he is going to get the production to be a viable running back 3 or 2 this week. I'm lukewarm on what he can do, but he's definitely going to get the numbers.
Yeah, there's no one else there. I mean, Devon Zigbo is on the IR. Leonard Fournette is in the better part of Florida, so they really don't have anybody to provide any competition for James Robinson, so it's James Robinson full go. But if you didn't like Leonard Fournette, if you had the conversation about Leonard Fournette, like, oh man, this team is terrible, this offensive line is terrible, this team is probably not going to find themselves in situations to run the ball often, all of these things also apply to the guy that's taking over Leonard Fournette's role, which is something that I find hilarious because when people talk about James Robinson and Devon Ezigbo and Chris Thompson and the other 50,000 people in that backfield that we don't even know about yet, they're so excited about them and aren't holding that same energy when Leonard Fournette was at the top of that backfield. They were saying, okay, well, factors outside of his control are causing him to not even be a good player in fantasy. So I think you need to carry that same level of, I guess, wariness when looking at this team to James Robinson.
Exactly. 100%. So let's move on to the next matchup, and we've got the Bears versus the Lions in Detroit. With the Bears, we're going to have a Mitch Trubisky run offense. He got the nod for the starting position. And so, as always, it's all systems go for Allen Robinson. We're excited about him. He is a quarterback-proof wide receiver if I've ever seen one. In the rushing game, we've got David Montgomery and Tariq Cohen out there. Like I said, David Montgomery is coming off of that relatively severe groin injury that is faster than anticipated. So I'm excited about Tariq Cohen's prospects this week, both through the passing game and through the rushing game, because I think that David Montgomery is going to be on a pitch count, which could mean great things for Tariq Cohen, even though he's going up against a semi-stout Lions defense.
Yeah, I mean, Chicago, Detroit, obviously both of these teams kind of have um, a few positives to them. Both these teams definitely do have some negatives to them as well. I just do think that this is probably a game that's going to be more fantasy fertile than most people expect because of what we saw from Matthew Stafford last year. Matthew Stafford had, I think, one of the highest completion percentages over expectation in his entire career last season. He had one of his best ADOTs, I believe, last season. I know he's not going to have Kenny Golladay, but Marvin Hall is supposed to be a good wide receiver to be able to stay in there. We already talked about James Hockenson, or we already talked about TJ Hockenson on that offense. Looking at the other side of things, I do think that Montgomery might struggle a little bit, so that's just going to open up opportunity for Mr. Trubisky to run and maybe actually gain first downs if he wants to this year. I do think that obviously Allen Robinson is going to be peppered with targets because we just don't know outside of him who else is really going to have too much of an impact. You can throw out Anthony Miller if you want to. I would say if you're going to do that, you should probably be doing that in this game because in the absence of Darius Slay, I do think we're going to see some real issues with this Detroit Lions defensive backfield. So that's definitely what I'd look to target in this matchup. But honestly, this isn't necessarily a matchup I expect any of the highest scorers to come out of.
Right. I mean, I will say that Marvin Jones could be an elite scorer out of this week. Allen Robinson is always a possibility to take the top off. But of everybody in this matchup, the person that I'm most excited about at their respective position is TJ Hockenson. I think that Hockenson has the ability to come out of this week as a top 5 tight end because of what we talked about earlier, the limitation of targets in that target tree. You take Kenny Golladay out of that, and it's basically just Marvin Jones and TJ Hockenson getting the ball chucked to him by a Matt Stafford who's got something to prove coming back after an injury.
Hopefully some DeAndre Swift too. Hopefully he can be Theo Riddick in game 1.
That's right. Yeah, and so we look to the running game. We've got the trio of Adrian Peterson, Kerryon Johnson, and DeAndre Swift. Of those guys, the person that I'm most excited about is DeAndre Swift. But I think that it's probably, as a whole, going to be a muddied affair unless, like you said, we can get DeAndre Swift active in the passing game, which he is fully equipped for. Anything else to add to that matchup?
Yeah, I mean, I traded multiple times this offseason for DeAndre Swift, so AP signing kind of busted my balls just a little bit there. Wasn't super happy to see that, but I mean, look, I feel like Kerryon Johnson was going to be the same threat, and honestly, if somebody's more threatened by AP between the two of them, it's going to be Kerryon Johnson because if you look at the skill sets of the guys in that backfield, there's a bunch of guys that can be grinders, and then there's one guy that can actually run through the tackles. I'm saying there's a bunch of guys that can be grinders. There's one guy who can actually catch passes. Mm-hmm. So I do think, if anything, that role is going to immediately be his to give him some value and some pop in week 1. And hopefully over time we'll see him start to get worked more and more and more into that offense, especially if Kenny Golladay is out for any extended period of time. They're just going to need extra pass catchers on the field. So we're going to see him. We're going to see Cephas. And we're going to see some Marvin Hall.
Yep. 100%. DeAndre Swift was my number 2 pre-draft running back, and if there's one thing that I've learned in this draft process, it's you follow the talent and not the landing spot, and the talent lies with DeAndre Swift. So let's move on to the next matchup. We've got the Dolphins versus the Patriots in Foxborough. What's your take on this matchup?
Man, this is Dolphins-Patriots matchup. The Dolphins might actually win. We haven't seen that in a really, really long time. And that's not something you could even really utter with any type of even tongue-in-cheek certainty before Tom Brady was no longer a Patriot. But this is the world we're living in now, and this is the case. That said, I mean, this defensive backfield for the Miami Dolphins is one of the best in the league. It's probably hugely underrated. They just signed Byron Jones from the Dallas Cowboys last year. They already had one of the best CBs in the league opposite him. They have decent safety play. Now, whether or not they have the defensive line to really make this whole thing work, whether or not they kind of have the continuity on offense to make this whole thing work, is a different story entirely. But I do think that they do have enough defensive chops to kind of keep everything except for maybe Cam's rushing at bay. So I would expect that this is a team this is a game that is pretty much heavily contested throughout, and so I expect that the wide receivers that are healthy on the Dolphins side of things are actually going to do relatively well, even though one of those guys can be matched up against Stephon Gilmore. We talked about injuries earlier. I'm not sure if Devontae Parker has been cleared to play in this game. Do you know if he has?
He was not listed on the injury designation list by the NFL.
Perfect. So I'm looking to heavily invest in Preston Williams if that's the case, because he's going to be the guy who, again, has the beneficiary of being in a tight game, but also isn't going to be the guy that is going to really have to deal with that press coverage and that, man-on-man coverage that Stephon Gilmore is going to throw at him all game. So I do think Preston Williams, Mike Gesicki, those are going to be the guys that you want to target in this particular matchup. James White, obviously, is going to be another huge target.
Yep. Of the guys in this matchup that I'm most excited about, I think James White holds the highest ceiling for everybody. I think the passing and rushing game, with an uncertain Sony Michel coming in as the primary grinding back there, I think that James White is going to have the ability to be able to take it away. But I'm also excited about the prospect of Gesicki, Williams, and Parker. So let's move on to the Browns versus the Ravens in Baltimore. There's a lot to take from this. There's a lot of skill positions that are going to pop in this one. What's your take on it?
Yeah, Browns-Baltimore is one of the matchups that I'm really looking forward to this season. Probably the number 2 matchup. Not this season, but this week. The number 2 matchup that I'm looking forward to since the Thursday night game. I would put number 1 is probably going to be the Dallas Cowboys and the Los Angeles Rams. Outside of that, this would be the other matchup that I'm keeping an eye on, because I see 2 good defenses, see 2 good run games. I see, obviously, one quarterback has probably elevated himself way over the other one, so it's neither here nor there, but I kind of see teams that can mirror each other a little bit. Maybe not necessarily in the way that Lamar Jackson can run in a way that nobody really else can in the NFL, but just the way that they're built and the way that they actually want to attack the other teams with tight ends, so on and so forth. So for me, I do think that the wide receivers might struggle a little bit in this game because of the presence of Denzel Ward, because of the presence of Marlon Humphrey. These are 2 really, really good cornerbacks in the NFL. So I expect a lot to go to the tight ends. I expect big games from Mark Andrews. I know there's a lot of guys to catch passes in a Cleveland Browns uniform, but I do expect Austin Hooper to catch a touchdown pass in this one, just because that's probably going to be the easiest way to do it, because the guys on the outside are matched up against these ridiculous corners that the Baltimore Ravens have. I didn't mention Marcus Peters, who's also the CB2 on that Ravens team. So if you're looking at OBJ, if you're looking at Jarvis Landry, and on Tuesday you're wondering, man, why these guys didn't hit, that's why. So you're looking at the tight ends of this matchup. You're looking at the run games of this matchup. That's Nick Chubb. That's Mark Ingram. That's maybe J.K. Dobbins if he gets a more run in game 1. That's probably a little bit of Kareem Hunt. And then maybe we'll see a little bit from some of the wide receivers in this matchup. If there's a guy at wide receiver that I think could go off, it's Marquise Brown, just because I think Marquise Brown kind of has the speed to beat anybody. But outside of that, I would be a little bit more wary about wide receivers in this particular matchup than I would be normally.
I completely agree with you on the difficulty of the matchup. One guy that I would like to make a point on is OBJ. OBJ was injured the entire season last year, and he still put up a 1,000-yard season. I think that he is going to have something to prove when he comes back onto the field this year, and I think that a week 1 OBJ was something to prove as a dangerous man. So he's somebody that I'm not betting against right now, but I'm not saying is going to be up there in a top 5 wide receiver position. If I had him and drafted him, though, I'd be starting him. And as for Kareem Hunt, if you drafted Kareem Hunt but are thinking of him as a backup running back right now, then you shouldn't have drafted him, because Kareem Hunt is the yin to Nick Chubb's yang, and you need to understand that in every matchup that we go into, because even if you see a great defense, all that means to me is a negative for Nick Chubb, not a negative for Kareem Hunt, because Kareem Hunt is the guy that they scheme plays for around this great defense, where Chubb is the blaster up the center. So even when I see tough defensive competitions coming up, I think benefits for Kareem Hunt. Is that something that you can agree with in that logic?
Oh yeah. Kareem Hunt is the pass catcher in that offense of the two running backs. Not saying that Nick Chubb can't catch. It's just whether or not he's going to be asked to, and he's probably not going to be asked to because they have Kareem Hunt, who they just re-signed to a contract extension himself. So absolutely, in games where you expect these guys to have relatively close games to maybe have to throw at the end to win, you expect more from Kareem Hunt in that particular matchup. And I would also say that I really do think that Kareem Hunt is underrated in a lot of people's minds right now because even on the ground, the difference between Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb, while there may be a difference there, and you can argue that there's a difference there, I don't think it's wide. It's not huge. If Nick Chubb goes down in week 1, Browns will be fine. Kareem Hunt has shown that he's one of the best backs in the NFL. Even if that was in a Chiefs offense, that's kind of pumped up. But I really do think that Nick Chubb might have been one of the riskiest picks that you could have made early on in your drafts this season, just because you need him to score touchdowns and you need him to get yards. And if you're looking for versatility, it's just probably not going to be offered. It's probably not going to be something on offer for him during most of the season. So Kareem Hunt all day, especially in a matchup like this that is going to have situations that, again, have Austin Hooper and Kareem Hunt as the most open targets for Baker Mayfield throughout this game.
And don't ever forget that last season, the 8 games that Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb both played, Kareem Hunt scored 1.03 fantasy points per touch compared to Nick Chubb's 0.64. He almost doubled Nick Chubb's fantasy points per touch, which is largely in part due to a lack of red zone efficiency, but also due to the fact that Kareem Hunt is so much more dynamic, or asked to be more dynamic, in the rushing and passing attack. Let's move on to the next matchup, though. We've got Green Bay versus the Vikings in Minnesota. This is going to be one that's really interesting. These rivalry games always get serious, and you can never tell if it's going to be a grinder's game or a high-flying affair. If I had to guess, though, I'd say that this thing is going to be a little toned down, a little quite a small portion of points in this matchup.
Yeah, Nick, you couldn't have said it any better. You could not possibly have said it any better than that because that's what's going to happen. I mean, you might think, okay, we're going to have Aaron Rodgers versus this pumped-up Minnesota Vikings team that has weapons all over the field. But step back from that a little bit. Okay, you have Aaron Rodgers, you have Devontae Adams. Who's the best wide receiver 2 on that team? I think the best wide receiver outside of Adams on that team plays running back for that team. His name is Aaron Jones. And if you can kind of say the same thing about the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, say what you want to say about Kirk Cousins. I'm not here to say terrible things about Kirk Cousins because I've already done that. And if we're going to continue this relationship, you're just going to see me and my vitriol for Kirk Cousins moving forward. But let's let Kirk off the hook right now. But if you're just looking at the passing attack for that Minnesota Vikings team, again, you have a rookie who isn't really well enough ingratiated into the whole scheme of the NFL to be starting at wide receiver 2 on that team. Justin Jefferson is the wide receiver 3 on that team, and this team doesn't run 11 personnel. This team has run 12. This team has run 21. This team has tried to kind of slow the game down, and now they don't have a kind of take the top off wide receiver in the same way that they had Stephon Diggs in the past. So I do think that obviously we're going to see a touchdown. We're probably going to see a bunch of targets to Devontae Adams. We're going to see that early. We're probably going to see the same thing for Adam Thielen. I would expect him to be one of the most targeted wide receivers in the league throughout the season just because of the lack of other really experienced targets around him. So I do think that those are the guys that you really, really want in this particular matchup. But if you're looking for a high-scoring game with a lot of passing yards, I think you're going to be disappointed because both of these teams have decent defenses. Both of these teams are kind of set up to run on you and to win that way.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. I think that Thielen and, Devontae Adams are the guys to start in this matchup. The guys to keep an eye on for me are, Jay Sternberger and Irv Smith. Those are the two outliers at tight end position in this matchup. Just keep an eye on what their production is. Moving on to the rushing attack in this game, though, we know that Dalvin Cook is going to be hit early and often. He's going to get yards through the air. He's going to get rushing yards. Dalvin Cook is an auto start if he's healthy, no matter what the matchup is. Then we move over to the Packers running back situation. Now, this is going to be one that we want to monitor early on in the season. We've got last year's all-star running back, Aaron Jones, facing off against a giant behemoth of a man in A.J. Dillon, a guy who I am not super excited about, but week one will tell the tale if he's going to be their primary red zone back. If you had him as a flex option, would you be starting him this week in A.J. Dillon?
I'm not starting A.J. Dillon. I think that A.J. Dillon was overdrafted, just like Jordan Love was overdrafted. I think the Green Bay Packers had one of the worst drafts that we've seen in the last 20 years with what they did, but to trade up for Jordan Love, who they don't believe is ready to even kind of be the QB2 on that team right now, and then to follow that up with then going after A.J. Dillon when they could have got any of the wide receivers in this class. I mean, imagine Denzel Mims on that team. Imagine Bryan Edwards on that team. Imagine Justin Jefferson on that team, even though as a Vikings fan, that's probably not something that you want to imagine, but it could have gone so differently for Green Bay, and it didn't. But I do get what you're saying about whether or not he can take the goal line touches. I do think if they brought him in for a reason, that's probably the reason. Not to say that Aaron Jones wasn't extremely effective on those same goal line touches last year. So I do think that the dynasty community and the fantasy community's kind of distrust of Aaron Jones, ranking him after last year's, I think, RB2 overall performance, ranking him as an RB16, I think that's the pendulum just sliding way too far to the wrong side, and that's just a massive overcorrection that I think is kind of going to bear itself out during the course of the season. I think we're looking at an RB8, RB9 in Aaron Jones pretty much at worst, and I do see a pretty heavy workload for him in this game where the Green Bay Packers just aren't really going to be able to score at will, even though the Minnesota Vikings do have some issues on the defensive backside of the ball.
Yep. So the moral of the story for the Vikings versus the Packers is start your studs. Let's move on to the next matchup. And if you don't like A.J. Dillon, this partnership is going to work great. So let's move on to the next matchup. We've got the Chargers at the Bengals. I'll run over the Chargers hitters real quick. Like we said, we're not 100% sure if we're going to have Mike Williams in this game. But we've got Tyrod Taylor chucking the ball to Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry, and we've got Austin Eckler out of the backfield. I think all three of those are what you thought they were going to be. And in this matchup against the Bengals, I think those studs are the ones that you're going to want to start. Pretty much all gas, no brakes on those guys. Would you agree with that?
100%. 100%. I do think it's pretty clear who to go ahead and start on the Chargers, just because there isn't a ton of guys that really can do all that much on the Chargers. They have a few guys that are going to get the vast majority of that team's touches. When you look at the Cincinnati Bengals, I mean, if Derwin James is playing this game, I think this is a completely different game in terms of the level of defense that the Chargers can really throw at the Bengals. I still think that line is going to be imposing, and Joe Burrow is going to have a welcome to the NFL moment pretty quickly, pretty early in this game from either Bosa or Ingram. But at the same time, I mean, I've been talking about this all offseason. Pretty much everyone has been talking about this all offseason. He has LSU all over again, except for the line at LSU. I will give him that. But even that, there's a couple of rookies that are coming back this year that the Bengals didn't have last year. They're pretty much like brand new draft picks for them on that offensive line. So hopefully that's solidified as well. But, I mean, you can compare it, and let's go down the line. Okay, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he's amazing. Clyde Edwards-Helaire versus Joe Mixon, I'm taking Joe Mixon. Okay, let's move on. So Jamar Chase is amazing, and I love Jamar Chase, and I think Jamar Chase is probably going to be one of the top dynasty picks next season. Jamar Chase versus A.J. Green, healthy. I'm taking A.J. Green. And then you talk about Justin Jefferson. Okay, he's a pumped-up, pretty big slot receiver that can kind of get around his coverage. Doesn't necessarily need to be wide open. Doesn't need to have huge separation to be able to get his hands on the football. Or Tyler Boyd, who does that, does exactly what Justin Jefferson does. except does it with NFL experience.
Yes.
I'm taking Tyler Boyd in that instance. So If you look at the LSU roster and what made that LSU roster special with Joe Burrow, I think you can find a lot of those same things with the Cincinnati Bengals offense. So even though they're going up against a tough defense, I think the loss of Derwin James is definitely something that is going to go underreported at the start of the season. People are really going to expect this Chargers defense to still be one of the best in the league, and I just don't think that's the case because we've seen that that's not the case when Derwin James isn't playing. So I do think that this can be more of a high-scoring game than we think it's going to be, and I expect a lot of things out of Joe Burrow and pretty much everyone on that offense. But if you're looking for the guys that I expect to score and score early, I do think that you're going to get a lot of points from Joe Burrow, you're going to get a lot of points from Joe Mixon, you're going to get a lot of points from Tyler Boyd.
Yep, those would be my three that I'd be focusing on. Tentatively expecting a lot out of A.J. Green as well, but he's going to have to prove it on the field for me to get back in his good graces. Let's move on to the next matchup. We've got the Buccaneers versus the Saints, and this is going to be in New Orleans. We're seeing a Tom Brady run Bucs offense. And like we talked about earlier, with Mike Evans being hobbled right now, if he comes on the field, it is not a benefit to Mike Williams or to Mike Evans owners. It is a benefit to Chris Godwin owners. And if Mike Evans isn't out on the field, you need to temper expectations on Chris Godwin. If we're looking at the tight end position in this, not particularly excited about Rob Gronkowski. I'm not going to put my trust in him until I can see that he's full go. And the running backs in this game, it's Leonard Fournette or nobody, and I'm not even excited about that. What's your take on this side of the ball?
Yeah, I mean, I think that had you looked at this matchup last season, maybe not last season because Drew Brees was hurt, but maybe a couple seasons ago, you would have thought, okay, well, we're going to see about 72 points from both of these teams in this week. I don't think we're going to see that. I don't think the Bucs need to play like that anymore, number one. And these teams both have some of the best defense in the league. The Bucs defense is wildly underrated because of the terrible situations that they were put in by Jameis Winston last season. This Bucs defense, in terms of yards and in terms of the number of stops that they were actually able to produce, ranked as one of the best defenses in the league last season, especially the defensive line and that run defense. So if you're looking to start anyone who's really going to attack that, I do think that you might be a little bit misguided in that. For that reason, I would say, obviously, we're going to have some big scorers in this game. I think the big scorer in this game, we all know, it's going to be Michael Thomas because can't guard Mike. It just doesn't matter. I don't think you even need to factor in scenario or situation or whoever's covering him. I think you just start him every week because he's Mike. But beyond that, I do think that Alvin Kamara is definitely going to be in line for major usage through the air. I think that we're going to see more from Emmanuel Sanders that a lot of people expect from Emmanuel Sanders because you're not really going to run into the teeth of this Tampa Bay Bucs defense. And on the Brady side of things, on the Tampa Bay side of things, yeah, I do see how Marshawn's on Chris Godwin, and that maybe makes Chris Godwin a little bit more of somebody that you might have some question marks about. But at the same time, they're still going to throw the ball a ton to Chris Godwin. He's still going to catch a ton of passes in this one.
If you paid the price that you paid for Chris Godwin, you got.
You're starting him. You're starting him anyway. So it's one of those situations where I get what you were saying about maybe staying away from this Bucs backfield, and I would probably have that same type of advice for anybody that's looking at maybe playing a Leonard Fournette or a Ronald Jones in week one. You just don't know how those roles are going to stack up. But over the course of the year, I'm a lot more bullish on Leonard Fournette than most people out there because I think this is perfect. This is the dream of all people that had Leonard Fournette on that Jacksonville offense that didn't think that they were ever going to be in the red zone. Now they're going to be in the red zone all the time. And now they're probably going to be a team that finds themselves in positive situations where they can afford to run out the clock and they can afford to be more run heavy than they have been in the past. And comparing Leonard Fournette to Ronald Jones right now, I'm sorry, it's laughable. If you're still trying to make that comparison, if you're still trying to make Ronald Jones work, stop it, get some help. Like we're just gonna do the Michael Jordan meme in real life for you, and maybe then at that point you'll get it. But yeah, stay away from the Bucs backfield. Still betting on Chris Godwin. I would say maybe because Mike Evans is out, if he is indeed out this game, maybe you can look at one of Gronk or OJ Howard if you just kind of want to get a little bit cute, because you would expect one of those guys to get a touchdown.
Right.
But most of the value is going to be on the Michael Thomas side of things, like it usually is.
100%. So the players to watch in this matchup are obviously Chris Godwin, Michael Thomas, and Alvin Kamara. The things to keep an eye on in this are the usage of Emmanuel Sanders, because I'm really excited about his prospect as the first true number 2 that Drew Brees has had in multiple years. And then also keep an eye on the evolving nature of the split backfield in Tampa Bay. We're thinking that Leonard Fournette is going to emerge eventually as the bell cow back there, but the question is how early and how often. And one last pick, a vanity selection for me. Just keep an eye on my boy Adam Troutman. I know that they're going to be pumping up the personnel uses there, and I think that if there was ever a rookie tight end that was going to be able to show you something early on, it very well might be Adam Troutman. So just keep an eye on that guy, because he is a tight end pick that I think that you could stash and make benefit off of coming up very, very soon. So let's move on to the next matchup that we've got. We've got the Cardinals versus the 49ers, and this is in San Francisco. We have the losers of last year's Super Bowl facing off against Kyler Murray's Cardinals. Let's break this one down, Etan. What you got for me?
I feel personally hurt by this, because if you ever listen to the Dynasty Diagnostic, you've heard us bash Jimmy Garoppolo over and over and over and over again, and it's warranted. I will stand by it. It's absolutely warranted. Jimmy Garoppolo is not a great fantasy quarterback. Maybe. But now I think that he might need to be, because we might see some aggression from this defense as a whole. When you see these fantastic defensive performances, just like the Legion of Boom just a few years ago, it's fleeting. You know, it can really only stick around for a couple of seasons, because this just happens to be one of those things statistically that really doesn't stick from season to season to season. So I really do think that this is a case where the offense is just going to be asked to do more in San Francisco, and that's going to be meaning more pass attempts for Jimmy Garoppolo and more pass attempts really for George Kittle and for the other guys on that team if they can get healthy. The only issue is what I just said it was. It's the health of this team as a whole. So if the guys aren't out there to go ahead and give Jimmy Garoppolo that massive yak, I don't think he's going to be the type of quarterback that's just going to ratchet up his ADOT and just throw these guys open.
Right.
Because he hasn't ever really been that. I think he's going to need that yak from George Kittle. He's going to need that yak that is pretty much designed into the entire philosophy of that San Francisco offense by Kyle Shanahan, of Brandon Ayuk, and of Deebo Samuel. So it might be a situation where you see Kendrick Bourne get a touchdown, but not really do much else during the game, where you see a lot. Maybe go to Jerick McKinnon, who might be healthier than we all know. But I'm not necessarily expecting fireworks on that side of the football. What about you on the other side?
So for to wrap up on the San Francisco side real quick, I mean, obviously the Cardinals last year were the worst team against tight ends. So we're going to see George Kittle early and often, but we kind of always knew that. You drafted George Kittle to be that number 1 tight end position. When we talk about the health of Jerick McKinnon, that is the one thing that I wanted to focus on in this game. If there was a player that I am excited to see play week 1, it is Jerick McKinnon, guys. Because honestly, I know that they have weapons in that backfield, but those weapons are so scattered. And I think that Jerick McKinnon really has a lane for production to be able to come in as a receiving and possibly rushing back to be able to produce. And I think he could do it as early as week 1. But when we switch over to the other side of the ball on this with the Cardinals, obviously we're excited to see the chemistry between Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins evolve. I think that they're going to be heavy producers this week. I think that it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be a shootout. I think it's going to be a little bit of a grind, but Hopkins always gets his regardless of quarterback. We look at Christian Kirk, who is somebody that I think could benefit from secondary coverages, and then we look at Kenyon Drake, who is, Kenyon Drake is Kenyon Drake, receiving back, and he's going to get his against a tough 49ers defense.
I will say that the whole point of Isaiah Simmons and his existence in that Arizona Cardinals defense is to try to do something about George Kittle. I really do think that's why they drafted that man, and his size and his speed, his ability at least just to match up physically with Kittle. But Kittle's not a rookie,
Right.
Kittle's going to eat this man for breakfast at least today. So whether or not we see these guys meet later on in the season, we get the same results. I think that we might have something to say at that point. But game one of your NFL career, Nick, your job is to match up against George Kittle and prevent him from getting 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. Are you up for it?
No, I'm failing every fucking time. I'm out.
And that's going to be the life of Isaiah Simmons this week. So I really do think that George Kittle is definitely going to go off. When you look at the Arizona Cardinals wide receivers, I mean, Richard Sherman's going to be on one guy. Richard Sherman's going to be on D-Hop the entire game. So I really do think that you're going to see some open lanes for Christian Kirk. You might be able to see some extra targets for a guy like Kenyon Drake. I think they're going to swap out Kenyon Drake and Trace Edmonds more than we expect as well. So I think they're going to try to keep both of those guys as fresh as possible. So I would not hesitate really to go ahead and grab some Trace Edmonds right now and kind of just see what happens with that. But yeah, I really do think that most of the value in this offense is going to be concentrated in Kyler, in D-Hop, in Kirk, and in Drake for as long as Drake can stay healthy.
100%. And even though they are facing off against a stout secondary in the 49ers, I would not be concerned with putting Christian Kirk in as my flex option this week.
And Kyler Murray's used to getting sacked like 6 times a game anyway, so he's fine.
True.
It's just what he's used to.
Yeah, that's his new normal, So let's move on to the Cowboys versus the Rams, and this is in L.A. So we talked earlier about the possible injury designation for Amari Cooper, unsure of what's going on there. But if he is playing and if he is a full go, I think that we would be getting a little bit cute with ourselves if we started anticipating CeeDee Lamb being the primary beneficiary of this wide receiver core. I think that the guys that are going to see the majority of the workload this week are going to be Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup, obviously Zeke, and we've got to keep an eye on Blake Jarwin to see if that eventual breakout happens. CeeDee Lamb could produce because he's always the option of, taking one to the house or making a spectacular catch. But I think that we would be getting ahead of ourselves if we start projecting him to be the beneficiary of this over guys like Gallup and Cooper week 1.
Yeah, so this matchup is all kinds of wonderful. I mean, the only thing I heard you say that entire time, honestly, was that Cooper Kupp signed a $40 million extension and that he's going to be the wide receiver on the Los Angeles Rams that's going to be signed through 2023. But now that we can kind of get that out of the way and you actually want to talk about this game as a whole, we can start to just talk about some of the things that make you excited about this game. First of all, we expect both of these offenses to be pretty good. We expect both these offenses to kind of show us maybe some of the best offensive performance outside of maybe Baltimore and maybe Kansas City during the course of the season. We expect Dak to go off because of all the weapons that Dak has, and we expect both of these teams, specifically this particular matchup, to be a high-scoring one because both of these teams DGAF. Both of these teams are do not give a anything teams. And the reason that I say this is when you actually look at their situation neutral pace, they're number 2 and 3 overall in the entire NFL in terms of how fast they want to get their plays out, how many offensive plays they're trying to run. This side of Arizona, these are the fastest teams in the NFL. So I expect this to be very, very high-scoring game. When you look at the defenses, we just talked about Byron Jones no longer being a member of this Cowboys defensive backfield. I think the Cowboys team, Jerry Jones, he doesn't care about defense. He cares about maybe the front seven. He cares about Smith. He cares about Van Der Esch if Van Der Esch can get healthy. He cares about Marcus Lawrence. But the defensive backfield of this team isn't what you would expect. The defensive backfield of this team is going to regress, and they're going to feel that hit of having to go out and try to replace a guy like Byron Jones. I don't think you can do it that easily, especially not in the draft the way they tried to do it. Right. When you look on the other side of things, obviously Jalen Ramsey was just tied to a huge extension as well, which was pretty much a foregone conclusion the moment that they went ahead and traded multiple first-round draft picks for Jalen Ramsey like they did last season. So that was definitely going to happen. So where Jalen Ramsey goes is the guy that you want to avoid, and you don't necessarily know where Jalen Ramsey is going to go. I think the one thing that makes you excited about this Dallas Cowboys team is the simple fact that you cannot key in on a single guy on the Dallas Cowboys roster when you're looking at that offense. All of the receivers can play all of the receiver roles, and that's crazy. Usually you have an X, you have a dedicated Y, you have a dedicated Z. Mm-hmm. All of these guys can play every single spot in that offense. So on any given play, you might have Amari in the slot on this play, and then Lamb in the slot on this play, and then Gallup is going to play flanker on this play, but he's mostly going to play X during the course of the entire game. So it's just going to be hard to mash up against these guys man for man. And we're not even talking about Zeke. We're not even talking about Blake Jarwin. Both of those guys figure to also be involved in the passing game. So this is just going to be one of those games that you just want a piece of. What I mean by that is if you have Gerald Everett, you should be starting him in this game. That's how deep it goes with the way that these two teams are lined up to go ahead and attack each other.
So you're projecting this to be a Kansas City Rams 2018 game. The Fire game when they played and they scored, what was it? I think it was just shy of 100 points total in the game. So we're thinking that this is going to be a high-flying shootout, high-scoring affair, and everybody that's going to be able to touch the ball in this game is going to be a beneficiary of that.
This is absolutely going to be a barn burner. I mean, honestly, I would project Tony Pollard for scoring in this game if I thought Tony Pollard would get 5 touches this game. It's a matter of if you have someone who knows a friend of someone's dog that is playing on any of these teams, you should really consider starting that person in this game.
Sounds good to me. Well, that concludes our Sunday night games. We'll move on to the last 2 matchups on Monday. We've got the Steelers versus the Giants at New York. We're going to see the return of Big Ben Roethlisberger with his new odd throwing form, but I'm excited to see what Juju can do with Big Ben back in the fold. James Conner is going to get peppered heavily, early, and often, and I think that he is going to be a top 10 running asset this week. So basically the ones that I'm really excited about here are Juju, Ben, and James Conner out of the backfield. I'm not certain how excited I am about the Deontay Johnsons and James Washingtons of the world, but I think that they'll have their role in this game.
Yeah, here's my issue with the Steelers. They have the best defense in the league. And it's not particularly close. As soon as Minka Fitzpatrick joined that defense, right. I mean, that defense is solid. So whether or not they need to go out and put up 30 points is a question mark every single week. And I think a lot of people aren't really doing their due diligence and factoring that in because a lot of people still expect a lot, like you said, from Deontay Johnson, from Juju Smith-Schuster, from Chase Claypool, from Eric Ebron even in this offense. There's a lot of guys in an offense that isn't necessarily going to have to projected to be a high-powered offense because they don't necessarily need to be. Right. So that means it's kind of twofold bad for pretty much every asset in that offense because not only are you not getting the benefit of being the Steelers of old of just a couple of years ago when they had the killer bees and having 675 pass attempts, now that's probably going to be cut drastically, and there's more competition than there ever was. So it might be a situation where you see a big week from Juju here, a big week from Deontay here, so on and so forth, and you never really know who to play. I think this is actually pretty much going to mirror what you saw out of the last couple of seasons from the Minnesota Vikings offense, where it was Diggs and Thielen, and you didn't know which one you really wanted to play that game. You knew someone was going to go off, but you didn't know which one it was going to be. And I think that's what you're going to get a lot when you're looking at starting either Juju or Deontay or Ebron or so on and so forth. I think the one constant, and this is probably even going out on a limb to say that, I think the one constant on the team is James Conner because you expect him to get the full workload pretty much regardless of what happens as long as he's healthy. The moment he goes down, then I think it becomes a cluster all over again. And I think Big Ben was already kind of on the downward track before his injury. So whether or not he comes back and is the same guy, I don't know that we can all realistically expect that from him, especially in game one with no preseason.
100%. And I mean, that's the one key when we're talking about James Conner is obviously health. And then when looking at Juju, you made the parallels earlier talking about Chris Godwin, who you say that never actually took over the one role. He just played the two role as a one because Mike Evans was getting the primary coverage. I think a guy that is a very similar correlation to that is Juju Smith-Schuster. We saw him blow up when he wasn't getting the primary coverages, and when that started happening, we saw him start to fade. And so I do think that it'll be a little bit more of a give and take in this Pittsburgh passing attack, because we're not going to see somebody come out as the primary aggressive number one. Let's move over to the other side of the ball, though, with the Giants. As you said, the Steelers have a stout secondary. And so the only person that I'm particularly excited about in this matchup, I guess there's two, is Evan Ingram and obviously Saquon Barkley. What are your thoughts on that?
I actually have Evan Ingram and Austin Hooper in a league, and I have to choose who to start and who to sit in this particular matchup. And I'm starting Austin Hooper because of Minka Fitzpatrick. I expect him to be on Evan Ingram over the course of this game and to really cause problems for Danny Dimes. I know that there's going to be turnovers in this game. We're playing Danny Dimes, who's one of the most turnover-prone quarterbacks in the National Football League, against, again, one of the best defenses in the National Football League. So I do think they're going to check it over and over and over and over again, because they're going to have to, because they're going to throw like 2 interceptions and probably have a fumble in this game as well. That said, I mean, it's Saquon Barkley or bust really for me, because I just don't think that this team is really going to have to, or really going to be able to find any consistency outside of just running Saquon Barkley. And it's not even necessarily because Saquon Barkley has a good matchup. It's just because Saquon Barkley is fucking Saquon Barkley. Outside of that, I don't know if you really want to start anybody on this Giants team. I will say that we're going to find out really quickly with Golden State playing, with Sterling Shepard healthy for as long as Sterling Shepard's going to remain healthy, if Darius Slayton was a real or a mirage, or if he was a real thing or if he was a mirage from last season. I think people are going to be a little bit upset when they find out that when everyone's healthy and he's not the only game in town, he might not be the same guy that we saw last season.
Starts to blend in with the rest. Let's move. So basically on the other side of the ball, it's Saquon Barkley or bust. I'm still rolling with my boy Evan Ingram, though. I think he is one of the best talents at the tight end position in the NFL, and I would think I would be remiss by not starting him if you drafted him with his capital. But let's move on to the last matchup of the week. We've got the Tennessee Titans versus your Denver Broncos in Mile High Stadium, baby. So I'm going to give you the floor on this. Let's hear what you got for us.
Man, I wish I had like a bell to toll just to express my sadness at how this Broncos season is already just falling all over itself. Cortland Sutton out. Absolutely. Cortland Sutton out for an undisclosed period of time. That's definitely going to hurt the offense, because now you're thrusting Jerry Jeudy, who I think is a wide receiver 2, into a wide receiver 1 role, and you're getting KJ Hamler on the field earlier than he really needed to be on the field. So I think that hurts. Spawn Miller, he's going to be down for the majority of the season, if not the whole season. That's obviously definitely hurting. We just talked about the Chargers earlier. The Chargers just took our best defensive back from last season, Chris Harris, no longer on the squad. So I do have some concerns about that defense as well. Bradley Chubb is still dealing with an injury himself. And I mean, honestly, it looks like it's going to be Justin Simmons, Drew Lock, and Noah Fant against everyone, really, in this game. And that causes me to worry a little bit when I look at this Tennessee Titans defense that is built to just go ahead and run through you and play solid defense with Dory Jackson and win games. So it's going to be a Dory on Jerry Jeudy in this one. It's going to be, if anything, it's going to be the Broncos running game that is able to kind of get them to the finish line. But I know the Tennessee Titans have a pretty stout defense in and of themselves, so I don't expect fireworks really from any side of the field here. I will say that we don't have a cornerback that can cover A.J. Brown. It's not a thing that we have on this Broncos team right now, and I don't think we have the pass rush to get to Ryan Tannehill quicker than he can throw it to A.J. Brown. So I do expect a big game from A.J. Brown even though he's going to have Simmons over the top of him most of the time. Corey Davis playing or not playing doesn't matter to me at all. I think kind of like Ronald Jones with Corey Davis, I think you just need to understand that if it was going to happen, it would have happened. And the fact that it hasn't happened means it's not going to happen. So don't try to make something that's not going to happen. So
right.
I think that's where we're at with Corey Davis. But I do expect a big game from AJB. I think you have to pencil in Derrick Henry for a big game anytime he plays, kind of regardless of the matchup. So I would say that those are the guys that I'm playing in this game. But I also will say as a Bronco fan, if Cortland Sutton is indeed going to be missing some time, I would bump up Noah Fant a little bit in terms of tight ends that you could start that could realistically put in a top 5 tight end performance. I just think that, if you're going to throw the football, you're going to need to throw it to somebody, and you can't throw every pass to Jerry Jeudy. So it's going to be Noah Fant, and it's going to be Noah Fant, I think, in the red zone. I just don't expect too much from either Melvin Gordon or Phillip Lindsay in week 1 because I expect them to cannibalize each other. I think there's going to be production from the running back spot, but it's going to be split in a way that we don't fully know between the two of those guys, and I don't think that helps anybody fantasy-wise.
And I completely agree with everything that you just said right there. When it comes to the running back position on this Denver offense, we don't know what's going to play out right now. And anybody who thinks that Melvin Gordon is just going to run away with this job from Phillip Lindsay, who has already had more 1,000-yard seasons than Melvin Gordon has in his entire career, they're fooling themselves. This is going to be a split committee backfield for the foreseeable future until we see something start to break with the coaching play calls. But then we talk about the other side of the offense, or the other side of the ball with the Tennessee Titans. I love what you said about A.J. Brown and about Tannehill being able to get it out fast. And you guys, if you have listened to this show, if you've listened to this channel, this is the start, baby. This is where it starts, okay? This is where the Tannehill bandwagon starts up for this year. Top 10 quarterback. Let's get it. Because I'm excited, all right? Ryan Tannehill, for me, has so much potential. And I understand that he doesn't have the most diverse weapons in this offense, but with Jonnu, who is a yards-after-catch monster, with A.J. Brown, who is a yards-after-catch monster, and Derrick Henry predicating the play-action pass, I think that Tannehill has a real possibility of being a top 10 quarterback this year, and I'm excited for it to start this week.
Hey, man. I don't even agree with you, but I'm not even going to step on that take. That was great. That was brilliant. I love it. I might be changed. You might have made me a Ryan Tannehill stan right now.
All right, guys. Well, that brings us to a close on our week 1 matchups. The only thing that I know right now is that I am so damn excited to be able to watch a full day of football tomorrow. Thank you guys for bearing with us through the COVID, through the offseason, through all the weirdness that we've had to endure. And you guys, we're making it across the finish line tomorrow. We're here, baby. Etan, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I'm happy to have you be a partner with me on this, and I look forward to the future of this podcast. You got anything to say to the listeners before we cut out?
Man, I'm excited to be the second half of the TripleDFFP. I'm ready to go. Let's get dynasty.
Hell yeah, baby. All right, thanks, guys.